Today, we are discussing the nightmare of being all-powerful, the consequence of being God. What would it like to be God? And would it actually be a horrific experience? Would it be a nightmare? And could the creation of the universe actually be God's attempt to escape from this nightmare? Or was it even God's descent into madness? This is something that's not talked about very often at all, but it's an important subject and one we're going to explore. And we talk a lot about how we are God on this channel because collectively together we are God coming into consciousness of ourselves as God, as the absolute, as the eternal ground of existence on which everything else depends. So this is very appropriate to discuss and very important. The reason why, because it changes how we live our lives, the kind of society that we want to construct when we understand even how it affects the course of history itself. So this is really important. It's not just some kind of thought experiment, though we will be using a thought experiment, but it's really important. So to kick things off, to get this discussion started, this very important topic, we're going to be taking a look at some excerpts from an article on medium.com by Benjamin Cain called Tyranny and the Horror of Being God. And if you enjoy the excerpts that we read today, I highly recommend going and following Benjamin Cain on medium.com. And we're going to take a look at this. And I really want you to imagine this scenario because a lot of people think of being God as being something positive. And it is, but it's also negative. Remember that reality is perfectly balanced. So you have up only because you have down. You have left only because you have right. You have hot only because you have cold. You have a hill only because you have a valley. If you had no valley, you couldn't have a hill. If up didn't exist, down wouldn't make any sense. You only have these contrasting elements to compare one to the other. Our moments of suffering make the moments of happiness all that much more enjoyable. It's the contrast. So while there are positive elements to the idea of becoming God, we're going to be taking a look at some of the negative elements. And this isn't to be depressing or anything like that, but it's important to acknowledge because it has an impact on how we live our lives. And this is because a lot of people, not a lot of people, some people are rushing to reach the end of reality right away. They're trying their best to just reach it, and they're forgetting to enjoy life. And if you forget to enjoy life, if you get to enjoy this experience, you're missing out on half of what reality is about. Reality is about growing, learning, and understanding, and enjoying and experiencing as well. So we're going to see exactly why that is and what mistakes to avoid with regard to seeking out knowledge, understanding, etc. So let's take a look at this right here. So starting from some excerpts from this individual's article, Benjamin Cain says, "Suppose you woke up one day and found that you were the last person on earth. What kind of person could endure those dire circumstances, and what kind of life could you expect to have? You could have enormous freedom to go anywhere and to do anything you wanted. Indeed, you'd be free from morality and from all social laws, assuming those restrictions make sense only in a societal context in which there's more than one person. Your freedom might be spoiled by your sorrow for all the death and destruction that must have occurred to end the world. But suppose that when you awaken to this empty world, you've lost your memory of how it all happened, and you no longer remember having lived with anyone else. The scenario then is that you're the only one alive, and as far as you know, you're the only one who's ever lived. What sort of person would you be? This scenario might seem far-fetched or irrelevant, but this is hardly the first time it's been imagined. This thought experiment is a few thousand years old. We know it as monotheism." Now, this doesn't even have to apply to just monotheism, but the idea here is put yourself in the position of God. Put yourself as being all-powerful, all-knowing, and the only being of its kind. Now, there's two different ways I want to look at this. First of all, sort of the typical understanding of God. If you look at the typical understanding of God, then you'd be this all-powerful being, and there would be creation and all these lower beings around you. Now, even in that case, I want you to think about how isolating and lonely that would be. Because if you're God and you're at that level of God consciousness and everyone else has basically ant-like consciousness in comparison to you, imagine how isolating and lonely that would be. It would be like imagining that no human beings existed and only, let's say, apes existed. Well, you could sort of be a god in that scenario. Not really, not literally. You'd have to be a lot more powerful and intelligent to be in that scenario. But you can see the point where it really wouldn't be that satisfying. The whole point of what is satisfying is interacting with beings that are around the same level that you are. That's where that satisfaction comes from. That's where society and community plays an important role in our mental health. Anyone just left isolated and alone would die. But there's another way to think about this as well. Because what we understand God to be, and I like to use the term the absolute rather than God, is being all reality, all existence, and what we are. So in that aspect, if you're God, not only are you the only being in existence, you're the only thing in existence. Any creation that exists is an extension or an aspect of yourself. So I want you to imagine that you are God. All right, imagine that you're God, but imagine that nothing exists. No earth, no universe, no heaven, no hell. Just you. That's it. You alone are the only being in existence. Well, imagine how lonely that would be. Imagine how isolated that would be. Imagine how nightmarish and horrific that would be, to be the only being in existence. Now, when we think about this, we can really understand why reality has to be the way that it is. Now, I'm not going to get into a complicated discussion of that. But granted that a God exists, let's take for granted that a God exists. What would a God do? Would a God do like what it says that he would do in the Bible and create an earth with humans to watch them do their human things and want praise? Well, would that really be satisfying? Again, it would be like watching over ants. Would you get satisfaction from watching over ants and getting praise from ants, but being the only human being alive in existence? No, that would still be horrific. You'd be extremely isolated. And so it doesn't make sense. The idea of, let's say, Christianity or any of the monotheistic religions where God is a God that creates, there is no satisfaction that would come from this. So let's continue a little more here. I want to read a few more excerpts to drive this point home. Now it says, the first mind called God is timeless. It's the singularity of mind that's at the root of all things. So it has no memories of growing, and God is seemingly free, having no barriers to its will or knowledge. But being the only thing there is beyond time, there's not much for God to know or to do. Now, I don't want to get into the point of does God have memory of anything, because that gets into a lot more of a complicated understanding of reality, because then we have to realize that reality occurs in cycles, and there's a cyclic nature to reality. But it's really beyond the point. It doesn't matter if God has a memory of something or not. But the point is that if God is timeless and eternal and the only being, there's not much for God to do. Why would you create anything at all? It would be utterly boring and pointless. And if you already know everything, again, still boring and pointless. Now, to continue a little more from another excerpt, it says, and we can ponder what it would be like to be the only person left alive, or the only one who's ever really lived. Post-apocalyptic stories are usually grim, wistful, and terrifying. Why do you suppose that's so? For social creatures like us, it's because we prefer to live in the company of others. and we become lonely and even insane when left alone for too long, as in solitary confinement in prison or an end of the world scenario. And here's the point that I want to drive home here. It says, we become lonely and even insane when left alone for too long. So there's a couple things that I want to talk about here about God, the experience of God, and the creation of the universe. So if you imagine God in that isolated state, that lonely state, this would be a horrific state, a hellish state. So what is the only thing that God can do in that state? The only thing that God can do is to fracture itself and intentionally forget and limit itself. So what's happening, and if you give a lot of thought to this, you can see that this is really the only viable option, is that God, which is us, and you'll see why, God shatters itself into myriad perspectives, myriad pieces. And we can understand how this exists, how this happens by Leibniz's law and introducing difference. God is one and singular because God is identical to all that there is. God can create from itself and split itself into a multiplicity of perspectives. But what it does in splitting itself into this multiplicity of perspectives is it introduces difference. And from this difference erupts the Big Bang, because the Big Bang is the beginning of the physical universe and the beginning of the realm of difference. Difference exists in the physical universe, such as I am here and you are there. Things are hot and things are cold. Things are black, things are white, things are red, things are green. I am here, you are there. Like I said, this is the realm of difference. And you can see in the Big Bang, but prior to the Big Bang, there was no difference. Everything existed in a singularity. The Big Bang was when difference erupted into the universe that eventually evolved into what we know today. And so what this was, this Big Bang, was the shattering of God. It was God creating the universe from itself in a way where it intentionally forgot what it is. Because if it remembered, there'd be no point. All right, let's say that God retained its memories and created Earth and created humans. Well, humans are just avatars. So, and all of this is created from God. Remember, there's nothing other than God. So if God creates Earth and creates humans, they're created from its own substance. There's nothing other than God. God is all there is. So a creation is not a creation of something separate from itself. It's from itself. So if God creates Earth and God creates humans, then all of the consciousness of those humans would be of God. That would be God's consciousness. So meaning God could have the perspective of being human, but it would still know that it was God. And it would have all the understanding that it was still the only being in existence. And that would be terribly unsatisfying, terribly unfulfilling, and it'd be like talking to yourself in a mirror. If you're talking to yourself in the mirror, there's nothing satisfying about that. There's nothing satisfying about that at all. So what occurs is God shattering itself in such a way that all memory of what it is forgotten, and it disorganizes itself as massively as possible. And this is why the Big Bang occurs. That is the moment of the shattering of God into myriad perspectives and difference. And then through this, God is able to experience itself through itself in a satisfying way. Now, what do I mean by this? I mean, we're God. We are God and we did this. We forgot that we did this because we intentionally forgot that we did this. But guess what? Now I'm able to have a conversation with you. You're able to have a conversation with your friends and your family. We're now able to have this interaction with each other and be saved from this eternal isolation and solitude and loneliness. Now we're able to have community. We're able to have friends. We're able to have conversations. We are God experiencing its world through itself and has saved itself from that nightmarish state of loneliness and isolation. There's a lot more to this. I'm just kind of laying the foundation, though. There's different perspectives to this, and it's important to look at all of them. Now, you might be asking, and there was a question by Cosmo Keist in the chat earlier, who said, if God wanted to forget, then why are we trying to remember? And that's an excellent question. If God did this, we did this, if we intentionally forgot, then how come we talk about remembering that we're God and understanding that we're God? Why are we doing that? Shouldn't we just continue to live in ignorance? Well, and this is a really good question, and it's an important question. We want to remember that we are God in our state of diversity. Because if we remember that we are God in our state of diversity, then we can have the best of both worlds, where we know that we are all connected as one, but we can still have the joy and the exhilaration of interacting with ourselves in our diversified perspectives. Now, this is different from if God never did forget and just created humans and placed itself in human consciousness. That would not be satisfying, because God would still be all-knowing, all-powerful, and like I said, it'd be like talking to yourself in the mirror, because even though there would be different perspectives, the different perspectives would really still be sharing in that same absolute consciousness. And since it would still be sharing in that same absolute consciousness, there wouldn't be a satisfaction from it, because it would already know everything and have experienced it. There's just no satisfaction from it. We get satisfaction from it now because we are individuals who are all unique and different. We are different perspectives, different transformations of God. We are God, which is us, exploring ourselves in our various diversifications, our various transformations. And the reason why that we want to, quote unquote, remember that we're God is because we can create a better world based on that and have even better experiences together. And what I mean by that is, if we don't know that we're God and we think of ourselves as isolated units having no connection to each other, then we look at the other people as foreign and different and a threat. That's why we have so much sexism and racism and hatred and violence today. People who hate each other because they're different in some way, a different color skin or a different gender or a different sexual orientation or whatever. People hate because of that, and we have a lot of violence and bloodshed and just terrible things in general. But if we as a collective realize that we are God and having this experience together, then instead we can celebrate our differences and have the pleasure of getting to know and learning from each other and celebrate that diversity. Because you see, when we know that we are one and connected, we're still experiencing ourselves in diversity, and we can increase the level of satisfaction and increase the quality of the types of experiences that we can have together. Like, instead of trying to stop all the massive violence in the world, there just wouldn't be massive violence in the world. And instead of focusing on that, we can focus on our time and effort and resources into creating beautiful experiences together and enjoying our connections together. So the reason why that we are remembering this and coming to knowledge of this is because we basically created this game for ourselves, and having the knowledge that we are united is when we can really start to enjoy the game. All of this has been a real struggle. You know, if you look at the struggle of evolution through the tooth and nail and bloody survival of the fittest and all that, to human beings going to war and destroying each other, it's been awful. It's been terrible. But now, as we come to realize that we are one universally connected mind, expressing itself through individuated minds, then we have the opportunity to have that knowledge while still experiencing ourselves in our diversification. Now, here's the important thing to understand. Reality is about two things: knowledge and understanding, and having satisfying experiences, enjoying life. Some people want to just have all the knowledge and understanding and race to the end of history, race to the end of time. What happens at the end of time and the end of history? At the end of time and the end of history, we will have all evolved to maximum capacity. We will have all become extremely synchronized to the point where we collapse into an identity. Meaning, at the end of time and the end of history, we will have gone through this journey of life together and become so connected to each other that all difference will collapse into an identity, because there won't be any difference anymore, because we will all eventually, and this is at the end of time, so this is not anytime soon. This is at the end of time. We will all have, in a mental way, in a soulful way, become so in tune with each other that we collapse into an identity. Here's a good way to understand it. I really like this metaphor, okay? And imagine a bunch of musicians. I've used this metaphor before, but it's relevant to a lot of things. Imagine a big hall of musicians, violinists, pianists, trombone, all that, all these different musical instruments. Now imagine that they're all playing their own song. It's going to sound chaotic. It's going to sound discordant. It's going to sound awful. That's kind of like where we are today with all the violence and hate. No one's coordinating. No one's synchronized. Everyone's just looking out for themselves. It's just a mess and noise. What we want to do is coordinate together so we're playing a beautiful symphony, and we can create songs together and have this beautiful music that we play together. And you can imagine this journey of life is exploring all the different songs that we can create together, all the different things we can do together. The end of time would be kind of like when we have exhausted all possible songs and there's just a single note, just a flat single note. This is not perfect, but you can kind of imagine it like that. And this is when we collapse into an identity. That moment when we collapse into an identity is that moment where we're one and single and the only mind in existence once again. We will have gone all the way back to where we started. The end is the beginning, because then we'll have to shatter again and have a new Big Bang and start the journey again. So, you can see that it's important to enjoy life and have experiences, because if you're racing to the end and forgetting to enjoy life, you're going to forget you're going to miss out on what life is all about. It's kind of like speed running a video game. Speed runners don't even really enjoy the game. They just try and see how fast they can beat the game. They exploit a bunch of glitches and do a lot of tricks to just see how fast they can beat the game. And they miss out on a lot of the game because sometimes they skip levels and all this kind of stuff. So you don't want to speed run reality. You want to be able to enjoy reality, enjoy the journey, and enjoy existence, because that's why we're here. We're here to explore and learn together and experience ourselves in our diversification, and in addition to that, learn, grow, and understand as well. Knowledge is also important. The reason why knowledge is important is because as we gain knowledge of what we are, where we are, why we're here, we'll be able to create conditions that gives us better experiences. So we want to enjoy life. We want to have great experiences, and we want to have knowledge and grow. The more knowledge and grow we have, the better experiences that we have, and we'll have better and better and better experiences, increasingly better experiences, until we finally reach the end of time, where we collapse once again back into an identity, and we are just a single mind in identity. And then we shatter ourselves again into myriad perspectives, a new Big Bang, and start over again. So this can be looked at in a very negative way, as in that moment being nightmarish, that moment being terrible, and that moment being awful, and God shattering itself and wiping its own memory to forget the nightmare that it is the only being in existence, and to have that diverse experience. There's another really negative way to look at it too, and it's sort of like God descending into madness. Remember, they were talking about how a single person alone will go insane. Well, you can kind of think of God, or us, as having gone insane. You can think God is a singular mind that got lost with its own dream world, thinks that the dream world is real, and is interacting with itself, not knowing that it's interacting with itself, talking to itself. You can imagine an insane person who's kind of like in the corner, who got lost in their own world, and is now having experiences in their own mind, forgetting that of what it is. So now I want to say this is a very bleak view, but the truth is that it's not necessarily just a bleak view, because there's also positive views of it as well. So I'm going to share with you this beautiful quote by Crowley. Crowley said, "For I am divided for love's sake, for the chance of union. This is the creation of the world, that the pain of division is as nothing, and the joy of dissolution all." So basically what Crowley is saying here is that the world, or us, the singular entity, absolute, the mind, the one mind, which is what we are, divided itself, the Big Bang, for love's sake. Why for love's sake? For the chance of union again. For the chance of, because becoming singular is the ultimate union and the ultimate identity. So there's another very positive way to look at reality, as being a cosmic romance in which we started off as an identity and now we are a multiplicity, and we're experiencing this world in a way which you can think of us as like falling in love with each other as we get to know each other and grow and learn, which is falling in love with ourselves, because it's all ourselves, because we're becoming more in tune, we're getting to know each other, we're learning about the other person, all the different people together, and we're having this sort of cosmic romance across time, where eventually at the very end of time, once again, we've become so in tune, so united, that we are collapse into an identity. And you can imagine it sort of being like, imagine that you were in love with someone and you loved them so much and you guys spent eternity together, and eventually you collapsed into one being. Now that sounds great and that sounds nice, and collapsing into one being will be great for a while, and because that identity point will likely be at least the approach to it will be exhilarating, and that will be extremely satisfying. But if it goes on for too long, it would turn into a nightmare. It would turn into hell. So after being a complete and total identity, you could think of it as, the ultimate union at the end of the cosmic romance. We shatter ourselves again to have another chance at union. We divide ourselves again for the joy of experiencing coming together again. So you can think of it in a very positive way as this cosmic romance where we're exploring ourselves and falling in love, and then at the end of time becoming completely and totally unified, and then dividing ourselves once again to just keep experiencing this eternal romance and this eternal dance that we're having together. Now that's a fantastic, very positive view on it. I'm going to read the quote again by Crowley because I just love it so much. "For I am divided for love's sake, for the chance of union. This is the creation of the world. The pain of division is as nothing, and the joy of dissolution all." So this is a very, very positive way to think about it. And there's a lot of other positive ways to think about it. You can think of it as having this grand journey together, etc. So the thing is, well, what is true? Is it this horror? Is it this nightmare? Or is it this positive thing? Is it this positive romance? The answer is it's all these things and none of these things. Reality is very complex. So it's something beautiful and brilliant and wonderful. And it's something horrific and nightmarish. We have all these different contrasting attributes to reality. And this is what gives reality its definition. And the thing is, when we are at that level as well, we will be so evolved that the concepts that we have of what is nightmarish and what is horrific, etc., will be so different from the perspective of knowing that we are the absolute. And I'll tell you these experiences that I have with, mind-altering substances like psychedelics or LSD, etc. Remember, don't do anything dangerous and don't do anything illegal. But it gives one, or at least the experiences that I have, is that I've experienced the white light of the source, and I've experienced this cyclical nature, not this cyclical nature, but this sort of nature of understanding exactly what reality is in this process of division and separation and all being one mind. And is it horrific? Yes. Is it beautiful and joyous? Yes. And not only that, but there's a certain point where it's also, it just is what it is without any sort of judgment about it. So it'll go through this process of feeling absolute elation and joy and just amazement at the brilliance and excitement of what reality is, followed by the horror and the nightmare of realizing that you're an isolated singular mind at the root of all things, followed by indifference, followed by just going, oh, well, that just is how it is. That's how reality is. This is how it is. This is how it must be. And a very indifferent state. And this is a state that's very, one might call it an enlightened state. I don't really like using words like even God or enlightenment, etc. I try not to use them, but you might call it an enlightened state where you're not even feeling or making a judgment about it. It's not something beautiful and wonderful. And it's not something horrific, nightmarish. It's just that balancing point in the middle where it just is. Renaissance Fairies shared a quote by Carl Jung that's kind of appropriate. I don't remember what the quote is. Actually, let me see if I can read it real quick. I have it in my notifications. So earlier today, Renaissance Fairy in the chat showed a quote. And let me see if I have it still. It says, in the center is the individual where opposites are united. That one peaceful spot. The space where nothing moves, embedded in a world of chaos. So, Jung wasn't really talking about what we're talking about, but it's the same sort of thing where you have this idea of, is there a nightmarish aspect to reality? Yeah. Is there a brilliant, beautiful aspect to reality? Yeah. Just like you have hot and you have cold, you have up and you have down. But at the end of things, there's also that balancing point, that center in the middle, where we are in that absolute perspective, where it's just things are the way they are, and we accept the way they are, without any sort of real judgment about it. So I want to read a couple more things here. Another excerpt, right, from this article. Where there's just a continuing theme of talking about this sort of nightmarish element of existence. And actually, you know what? I actually don't want to read more from that because it just talks a lot more about the horror that one experiences as being a singular entity. And I think that we've kind of established that and gotten that. And I want to make it clear, though, as like the quote from Aleister Crowley, there is this brilliant and beautiful and exciting aspect of it. It's kind of like, is the glass half empty or is it half full? There's kind of different perspectives that you can take on it. And there's that beautiful perspective of having that cosmic romance and achieving union and having this beautiful ability to repeat that again and again. And we're not going to live the same lives over again and again. It's likely that we have different experiences every time we do this. It's likely, at least talking about it in a simplistic way. If we talk about it in an overarching way, that becomes more complex. We'll talk about that another time. But reality is important for us to know what we are, where we are, and why we are here. Because it gives us that opportunity as knowing that we are God to be able to experience ourselves in diversity. So that way, when I'm talking to you right now, you know that you're talking to yourself. I'm talking to myself and you're talking to yourself right now. But that's okay. It doesn't have to be this horrific experience because in that understanding, we can rejoice in it because we're having this diverse experience together. And there's so much to explore, so much to learn, so much to grow. It's kind of like this. If you're playing a video game, the fact that you know it's a game doesn't make it less fun. In fact, it can make it more fun because now you know all the challenges are just adding to the excitement of the game. So we want to really be able to, with the knowledge of what we are, is create better and better experiences, better modes of this game together. And you can see how once humanity reaches this consciousness, we'll be able to create a brilliant planetary civilization where the world is united as one. And when the world is united as one, we'll all understand what we are. And we can have these experiences together. And we can have that knowledge of we are all in this together. If you really understand this and you really come to this conclusion, it's very exciting to meet other people who understand this, because it can be a very isolating experience to have this knowledge when no one else does. Imagine being in a group of humans, but you're the only self-aware human. And all the other humans are sort of behaving like animals. They haven't developed self-awareness, but you're the only self-aware human. That would be very isolating. Well, within regular society, being among self-aware humans and being one who has the knowledge that we are all one, it's a very frustrating and isolating experience to have no one else recognize that. And I'm sure if you have understood this and have gone through this, you felt that loneliness and isolation when others have no idea what you're talking about or can't understand. But that's why we can create this community where we can create communities where we understand what we are together and we can have that reflection and recognition. That's important to have that recognition, because that recognition isn't there with regular people. You can have great connections and conversations with them, but that recognition of looking into another's eyes that has also awakened and seeing a reflection of yourself and them seeing a reflection of themselves, that's a kind of recognition, and that's a kind of connection that's on in divine level. And then we can create a divine world at that level. And we can construct a new society. Human beings, when they gained self-awareness, were able to create, they went from living in caves to creating governments and nations and cultures, and self-awareness allowed them to do this. Without self-awareness, they couldn't do this. When we, together, collectively, or at least a large number of us, or a substantial number of us, reach hyper-awareness, we will be able to create a new structure, a planetary civilization. Human beings at the level of self-awareness they have right now can't create a planetary civilization. It requires a level of cooperation and cohesion where we know that we're operating together as reflections of each other to create that planetary civilization. That's why it's so important to spread this information. It's so important to spread this information because we can't have a new world until we have a new consciousness. Humans couldn't create governments and cities and nations until they became self-aware. The consciousness came with it. We can't construct a planetary civilization until we have a substantial number of people that have become hyper-aware. So we must have that new level of consciousness to have a new world. And that's critical to understand. That's super important to understand. That's why spreading information, spreading this knowledge, getting people to understand this is so important, is so paramount to what we're doing. So, I'm curious what you think. I want to know in the comments. Tell me if you think that what perspective do you have? Do you have the perspective that it's very nightmarish and horrific? Or do you have the perspective of it being a cosmic romance? Or do you have the perspective of it being a game that we're having together, a journey? Tell me. Or do you think it just is what it is? Tell me in the comments. I'm curious. And if you haven't already, please like and subscribe. It helps out a lot, spreads this information around. There's a lot more videos. Check out my videos. And as I said, please share this video. Share. When you share these videos, it spreads this information. And like I said, it's what helps kickstart that knowledge and understanding that will eventually lead to a transformation of a new world and a new consciousness. If you enjoy my work, if you enjoy my videos, if you felt like you ever learned something or got something from them, consider supporting on Patreon so that I can continue to create more videos and higher quality content. You can get access to our weekly secret videos and secret live streams. We're having one right after this, which is about simulation theory. Is reality a simulation? The danger of simulation theory. And you'll be able to access the archives of all the secret videos. You can go watch them all. Our Discord server, the Citadel, where the community is there. And yeah, I appreciate it very much. That's how I'm able to do my work. And a shout out to everyone who does support, especially philanthropists, Zach, Renaissance Fairy, Cassidy, Michael, Angela, Maria, Top of the World, Ethan, Joel, and It's Vashida. You can also support by hitting the join button right below this video on YouTube. Thank you very much.